For people who just joined online, thank you for joining us. And good morning, afternoon, wherever you are. We might have people continue to join because I know it's lunchtime for many of you, so appreciate it. But in the meantime, we will get started with the intro, and then other people feel free to join. So welcome everyone officially. Thank you for joining this webinar to hear about the newest ULI thought leadership piece, which is our sixth annual Global Sustainability Outlook for 2026. We're really happy to be bringing together industry leaders on key topics surrounding sustainability and their business case for the real estate industry. Let me quickly pull up a deck here. All right. Yep. So just bit of quick self-intro. Hi, I'm Jenny. I am the director for sustainability for ULI Asia Pacific. I will be your host today. And really at ULI, our role here is to build a platform as the regional connector of knowledge of our vast membership network experts and also be kind of an orchestrator of industry initiatives and partnerships with private industry as well as other organizations. So really happy to have everyone here and joining us online. Before we jump into our topic today, just a few quick housekeeping notes. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to the ULI Knowledge Finder, which will be available to all of our global member network. And we will be using a Q&A box for the Q&A process. So anytime during the webinar, if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A box. And our panel will try to address some of it either along the chat or toward the end when we have a Q&A session. And so I want to share a little bit about the process so each year, the Global Sustainability Outlook is informed by interviewing member experts around the world. So we do this through doing focus group with three of our regional sustainability product councils. So in APAC, we have the Net Zero Council. In Europe, we have the Europe Sustainability Council. And in the US, we also have the Sustainable Development Council. And this year, we've added something new, which is we've also included district council and local council sustainability committees so that we can get a more holistic and ground level picture of what's ahead in 2026 from practitioners. And these discussions are really central around the key theme of asking our member network what sustainability topics and issues are on the rise for them, why do they matter, and what actions should the industry pursue moving forward. And then the team will basically synthesize all of these conversations into top 5 issues each year to look out for in the upcoming year. So what we'll do is we'll share in the chat the 2 links. One is the link to this year's article, so the 5 topics that I'll briefly go over for 2026. And we've also tried something new this year is we have another article that looks at the Sustainability Outlook report for the past 5 years to kind of look at how our focus have been shifting and refined over the past 5 years. So that's also an interesting kind of pre-read to this year's article to give you a bit of context. So as I mentioned, this is our 6th edition of this Global Sustainability Outlook. So this research started as a full report to highlight and did the 5 trends for each year. And then we realized that actually the summary article that we put out were much more popular and digestible for people. So starting last year, we've pivoted to a article format to give people a really snappy shot of the top things to keep in mind. So that's also what we've done for this year. And here is a quick overview of this year's theme. So I'll quickly go over these and then we'll get into our panel discussion. And these are not ranked in order per se, but are instead more of interconnected themes that impact what industry stakeholders are choosing to act on. So the continuation to recognize the financial risk of inaction and the business case for decarbonization is very much central, and linked to the second one, which is more from the perspective of how we're doing this as an industry, which is by standardizing and integrating sustainability metrics into investment decisions, into models and valuations. And then the third point also, regarding a whole life cycle perspective and a shift toward scalable solutions is how we're thinking about accelerating our progress, our collective progress. And we'll also be diving deeper into this topic today with our panelists' sharings from their practical experience. And you've probably been hearing a lot about AI. There's lots of other webinars on the rise of AI and how it's rewiring everything, how we're doing many things. So from a sustainability angle, it's both a tool to accelerate the discovery and implementation of our solutions, as well as a resource challenge in itself. So this is more about how we can best leverage technology to have a net positive outcome, balancing these sort of two sides on our resource utilization. And last but not least, escalating physical climate risk. I think it's very much a current, not a future risk. So now the focus is much more on operationalizing our preparedness at both the asset level as well as the kind of market and neighborhood level. So these are some of the topics that are rising to the top of the agenda as well. So today we are very happy to have our cross-region expert panel. So we have Edward joining us from Singapore Building Construction Authority, and then May joining us from Salter Brothers, Han joining us from Keppel, also based in Singapore, and Paul is our moderator joining us from Atelier 10. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Paul.
Thanks so much, Jenny, and g'day, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here with this extraordinary panel who've got lots of insights to share about the 2026 Global Sustainability Outlook. We're going to talk through the 4 of the 5 themes as a group, and while we're talking, if anything pops to mind, please post questions. We'll be reviewing them as you post them, and we'll weave them into the discussion, and then we'll catch the rest of your questions, or as many of them as we can, at the end. So, starting with the first point, a very timely one. Clearly, momentum in the property industry has shifted from why are we going to be sustainable to how are we going to be more sustainable, and critically, how does this add value to my assets and my portfolio? I'm really keen to hear from our panelists. How is this drive towards decarbonization and greater sustainability now shaping your business cases for investment, both in existing assets and the development of new assets? And let's hear first from May.
Well, we're actually seeing a lot of through climate reporting, there's a convergence of people seeing the value impact of doing nothing. And that actually is quite scary because obviously our insurance premiums have gone through the roof and everyone's experiencing that. And seem to be no end in sight. But when you've done the climate reporting, you've actually understood now what they're seeing that we haven't seen before. And so when people talk about stranded buildings, it's not necessarily stranded in that way, but it's just that the additional capital to try to fix your buildings and be the onslaught of what happens next is far scarier than actually the decarbonization track. So whilst it's necessary to reallocate capex, you just have to take a long-term thinking, and that actually has been amazing to be able to have that foresight.
Terrific. So the shift from short-term to long-term kind of appreciation of value is clearly something I hear from my clients. And Han, in your work with Keppel, how are you building decarbonization considerations and sustainability into the everyday business case work that you do when considering investments?
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction. To expand a bit on my role, I am the Director of Sustainability and ESG Strategy for Keppel in our fund management and investment business. And what we therefore do is to look at different types of portfolios across real estate, infrastructure, and data centers and connectivity types of assets, and look at the best ways of actually deriving value. And that leads us to the conversation on sustainability, because once you decarbonize, there's going to be a lot of value to be had from sustainability. And there's going to be a lot of value to be had as well from, well, things like putting in your underwriting, your climate value at risk, things like putting in sufficient investments to protect your asset against climate change or the threats of climate change, for instance. But also putting in these types of solutions and technologies that will decarbonize your asset over time, especially in its operations. So as the asset starts to save more energy throughout its operations, it will also start to improve its asset value as a function of the percentage of, or rather the dollar savings divided by the cap rate. So if your asset, for instance, saves $1 million per year, and if the cap rate of your built asset or your real asset is 4%, that's 100 divided by 4, and that's a 25 million value appreciation year on year. Right? So that is significant when you talk about it in these terms, rather than what the payback's going to be, or rather than just what the payback's going to be, and so on. And we're seeing the cost curves really come down as a result of the lowered costs of technology and production due to a huge proliferation of these types of energy savings technologies, especially coming out of North Asia. So I think what we're therefore seeing is a nexus of the availability of such solutions at a fairly relatively low price point compared to, say, 10, 15 years ago. And the conversation and the narrative has also shifted towards what sort of asset value you would get as a result of going green, as a result of decarbonization. Right? So when all this is therefore underwritten, including things like the savings of shadow carbon or embodied carbon, including things like what sort of returns due to sustainable solutions specifically, right? That becomes part of the investment thesis, and that immediately becomes measurable. Right? So we're seeing an industry sort of shift towards that. Right? There are still gaps, certainly. Right? The gaps are such that you still cannot evaluate how much your embodied carbon savings will lead to in terms of investment value, as opposed to operational carbon, for instance. And the other gaps also include the relatively short fund cycles and the short life cycles of funds compared to the actual life cycles of buildings. So that's another gap to bridge.
It sounds like it's fair to say, both for you, Han, and you, May, sustainability has gone from being a checkbox kind of slightly dumb criteria in business cases to being quite a complex and multi-criteria assessment in your business cases, and then as you said, not just the forms, but the thesis for investment.
That's right. Yeah.
It's about true value now that can be calculated.
Right, and it's gone from being not just a cost, but to value, which is a huge conceptual shift, which is really terrific, and it's great to see that's not just happening in our region, but globally, as this points out. I think just the complexity of this kind of is a nice segue to the next headline from the Global Sustainability Outlook, which is the challenge we're all facing of how we standardize our descriptions of sustainability and the way we integrate them into our business models. We now care so much about so many different things. This has become quite a big task, to the point that I was just in a kind of strategy session yesterday for Australian sustainability leaders, and the discussion around how difficult it is to align the boundaries around Scope 3 reporting, quite a very technical subject, was causing mountains of work for the sustainability managers, the investment managers, the investor relation folks. So, we know that there are many challenges that are coming as we try to standardize how we work through business models here. What do you each think? And we'll start with Han and then go to May and then to Edward. What do you think are our biggest challenges, or the biggest needs to standardize our way of grappling with sustainability in our business models? If you could pick a thing to just get everybody to agree on or to standardize, Han, for you, what would that be?
Yeah, I think standardization of things like building ratings and so on is going to continue to become or to be challenging because of the vastly differing climates that we all live in. So what is a green building in Singapore, for instance, is measured against the average or the nominal building here in Singapore, as opposed to a building in the temperate climates, which would experience a very different heat profile, a very different cooling load profile. And what we therefore see is the optimization of an asset relative to its market or relative to its climate, as opposed to what is universally and absolutely green. So standardization would have to come with these types of considerations. And also, similarly, because we're all across different geographies, at least in the entire ULI population, what we'll also see is a variation across what is value at risk due to both physical and transition risks. For example, because we're all at different levels of exposure to climate risks. We're also at different levels of adoption of many of these strategies, which also puts us at different rankings or different rates of adopting transition risk mitigation measures or adaptation measures. Right, so that's going to be one huge challenge. But I think as long as we're cognizant of the presence of these different diversities, the way forward really is to identify horizontals where we can learn from each different market, and where we can then price, to May's point earlier as well, where we can then price what is true sustainability, what is green, what is true greenness, right? And therefore, how do you price and insure against these types of things when it comes to underwriting and investments, when it comes to valuation of assets, and ultimately also when it comes to operational efficiencies in running these assets.
Terrific. And thank you for being so hopeful and optimistic about the challenge of herding a lot of rating cats and measurement cats in the same direction. May, what would be your request for the thing we can all do to come to agreement about a way to put sustainability into our business models?
I think if you look at how everyone's converging in a real estate form, GRES has actually dictated what is green in this space, and they're now moving into data centers, which actually then completes the full spectrum of buildings. And I actually think it's actually heralded as the champion for real estate, because it's the one common language that we need to gauge across, and it allows us to share the data in the most respective way. And sometimes, and they're willing to actually do some, it's interesting the way they operate, because it's always continuous improvement. So you benchmark against 100, and the easier questions drops out every year. And so therefore you're always chasing your own tail. So it means that you're always vigilant and hungry to make change. So you're not ever, even if you get the same score last year, it would have meant that you've jumped to significant hurdles to get the same score. It's frustrating in that way, but I think that actually then speaks to what's coming next, because they've always used industry participation to figure out where should we align ourselves, and the scoring is usually 2 years ahead of policy, because it's a voluntary system. And so you're keeping in touch with what's happening in the world. They're talking about now the natural systems and that component, and it allows the industry to award the leaders, create a pathway so that the middle of the pack lifts up their game, because the leaders have actually stumbled through the top end, and then enables us to understand, okay, so the rest of us, how do we do it? Well, that's okay. GRES has already have 1,000 cohorts paving that way for you, and so you've softened the landing for the stragglers come through. They'll say, okay, you just need to do this, and this. You skip all the learnings, and I think that in itself creates that consistency, I would say, across our industry, and I think that's important.
I couldn't agree more, May, and thanks so much for shouting out GRES for the good work they've been doing to get us all to talk about sustainability in a similar fashion. We see that European taxonomy for green buildings doing similar work. Edward, you've been waiting very patiently, and you've got a unique perspective on all of this from your work with the Building and Construction Authority, where you both set the regulation, but then you also set the kind of the incentive frameworks and the kind of the the above and beyond frameworks through the Green Mark system. How do you see your organization and the other industry kind of thought leadership organizations like the BCA? How do you see your immediate contributions to further standardizing, especially the way we measure sustainability and we standardize it for business cases?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So fully agree with what Han and Mate have said. Actually, if you think about it, I think the strong partnership between businesses and policymakers are really critical. I think in Singapore's context, Han can feel free to add on as well. For the past 20 years, we have been closely partnering with industry stakeholders, the likes of Singapore Green Building Council. I think we co-create what we call Singapore Green Building Master Plans. So we have the latest editions of the master plans. Basically, it essentially developed the ecosystem of green building in Singapore, starting from standards, green building rating systems, industry capabilities, research. I think we also have policies in terms of carrot and sticks. Over the years, we have rolled out incentives in terms of green mark incentive schemes for new buildings or existing buildings, as well as sticks in terms of regulations. I think back in 2008, we introduced the Code on Environmental Sustainability, where we mandate new buildings of a certain size, minimum of 2,000 square meter and above, to be green. And then we define what is green buildings. So essentially, it's green mark certified minimally, and it can go even beyond what we call super low energy buildings today. So I think my takeaway is really one, the strong partnership with industry, businesses, NGOs like ULI, WGBC, SGBC, I think is really critical. It has to be both bottoms up and top down as well. Then the second point is really the backing of the policymakers. I think is very important. That's how you can move some of the regulations. In fact, last year we just passed regulations on mandatory energy improvement in buildings. So essentially that keep building owners like Han and other developers on their toes for existing buildings. So I think over the years, together with businesses, we have been also collecting some of the energy consumption data. So this is really a ground up. Um, so I think the second point is basically we need the support of industry practitioners. I think the experts, industry experts are really critical as we build up the data. I think that's one important factor that we realize over the past 20 years. Without the data, we can't really move any of the legislation or regulations. We need to be informed by the data, and then we need to make sense of it. And when we analyze and we co-create the policies together with industry. So all in all, I think we have this target, what we call 80-80-80 in 2030. So basically, we want to have 80% of buildings to be green in 2030, 80% of new developments to be super low energy buildings from 2030, and also 80% of energy efficiency improvement from the 2005 level. That's where we started the Green Mark in Singapore by 2030. So, and just to share, even the last month, our minister have also launched publications on built environment decarbonisation technology roadmap. So it's essentially encapsulate all the thinking. I think we have done a lot of roundtables, a series of discussions with industries, and how to capture the next bound of technologies over the next 10 to 15 years. I think so far for Singapore, we have achieved 72% of energy efficiency. That's the best in class green buildings to date. But really, we want to push even further. As you know, we are targeting towards net zero in 2050. Yeah, so I think these two essence, I mean, these two challenge that we turn into opportunities are very critical. One is strong partnership. Second is data. Yeah, thanks.
Terrific. Thanks, Edward. And I just want to reflect that the work you've been doing to create the decarbonisation roadmap sets the stage for the methods that then build into business cases that we then, can work out all the details of how we measure stuff and report stuff and calculate value of stuff. So having that early sense of where things are going is so valuable to all of us. Thank you for the work you're doing there. It also, it's a point is a good segue into the third headline, the third big theme from the Global Sustainability Outlook, which is how we are all shifting to whole of life, life cycle decarbonization, not just the kind of operational, but whole of life, and also how we're doing this beyond the scale of a chiller or a building, but how we're doing this across portfolios. And it was interesting that in our kind of discussion for this session, several of us in different ways came to want to talk about the opportunity of kind of operating our built environment and our buildings in ways that we can take better advantage of kind of hour by hour kind of grid carbon intensities, energy carbon intensities, so that we can immediately reduce our operational carbon intensities. And this is a new idea for some parts of the world, although it's been going on for a while in California and other areas. So since everyone is really keen to talk about this as a big shift, I want to start out with you, May. Tell us why you and Salter Brothers are excited about kind of smart buildings and real-time decarbonization.
Well, we're actually, I mean, if you look at the way that the grid's decarbonizing to date, solar and wind are now far cheaper to operate than coal and gas. So globally, everyone's found the secret sauce. It doesn't matter whether you're in a cold climate or not, or you will use a mixture of those two. Now, those two technologies, though, you're exposed to weather patterns as we get towards I would say the greenhouse gas effect, and as we converge towards 2 degrees, weather patterns will be much more diverse, and the stability of the grid, it becomes a challenge. So we got to actually use our buildings, where the buildings represent 30%, sometimes 40% of all the energy source. We got to use it smartly. So we got to have to be a very grid interactive building. So we got to have to match the load, and by doing that, we're rewarded. So we're talking about a lot of companies now will have something called power purchase agreement. There is a mixture of wind and solar, and wind and solar is at the cheapest, is where we want our energy to run. Now, obviously, buildings run because people are in it. We're using it 9 to 5, or in a hotel in a different 24/7 in a different way. So we can't expect people to change the way they use energy. So we're going to really then work towards, okay, we're going to be rewarded by cheap energy. How can we put in new technologies to capture ways to shift that load towards that kind to match what's out in the grid? And so we're looking at thermal storage, which is, although it can be quite a new challenge. It's an old problem, but these days we've got much more stability. And also battery storage has become very, very cheap in Australia. So with those two technologies, we're actually being able to kind of really enjoy the cheap power. So in Australia, we now have so much solar, we're giving it away for free. So somewhere between the hours of 11 to maybe like 2, or maybe 10 to 1, we're actually challenging the grid to give power to everyone. Now, it's only available to residential, which is a fair component, but it's not long before we have so much solar that it will be free. So as a building owner, we must look ahead and actually try some of these technologies, because we want to move with the transition. We want to actually allow our buildings to be able to save the transition, save all that energy, and then use it later when energy is going to be extremely expensive. So it's really exciting.
And a very quick follow-up, May, in your properties, are you already installing chilled water tanks or hot water tanks? Are you installing electrical batteries, or are you preparing to do that?
We're lucky in a hotel, there's always hot water tanks already. So there's a level of hot water tanks available. It's a matter of actually putting a smart controller on top and generating that at the time that is required. So we're not really doing a huge amount in that way, because hotels have always traditionally have huge amount of water tanks, because Australia has always had issues with not water reliability, but pressure reliability. So most of the hotels, remnant of the issue that was prevalent in the 80s, already have huge storage tanks sitting on the roof. And then they just rechanging the way that you would use the controls and storage, and then they are having that ability to kind of then use that and having a smart control to then say when is the best time do we do this. Now, of course, we have to put in new technologies like heat pumps that are electrified version of it to really capture that component, but it's a small investment compared to compared for all the gains that you would get.
Yeah, I love that you're taking advantage of underused resources and underused kind of assets in your properties to drive energy storage. That's very clever. Han, at Keppel, how are you grappling with smart grids and real-time decarbonization, and what sort of value are you pursuing?
Yeah, I think with smart grids, a lot of it is infrastructural in nature. So you kind of have to have the operating municipality or the operating country even adopt these types of policies. But by and large, in Singapore, we do sort of, with any renewables, some of it that is unconsumed can actually go back to the grid. We're still in the process of establishing a more robust sort of grid sharing type of ecosystem, which will, I would say, shave off some of the peaks and troughs and allow for a more constant throughput of renewable energy. And I think that's something, hopefully, that within the next 10, 15 years, we can look forward to, including the possibilities and the potential of battery or building energy storage systems via batteries, especially for things like EV charging and so on, right? So once that's, I would say, set up, or once that's institutionalized, then we'll be able to work that together with the current decarbonization systems that we do have in our buildings, which includes, much more energy efficient equipment, for instance, but also the ability to manage the intelligence of these buildings through new technologies, which includes, like with everything these days, artificial intelligence that's therefore able to trend and detect potential failures, trend and detect potential downtimes, and be able to either preempt or manage these ahead of the event, right? Ahead of actual failures happening. So a combination of all these things that is adequately managed, adequately or efficiently operated, as well as appropriately priced, right, would lead us towards, I would say, a better and a bigger journey towards decarbonization for our assets in the future.
Terrific. And Edward, at BCA, do you see a role in kind of research and regulation and reward systems around smart grids and being more nimble with energy purchase so that it tracks with lower carbon intensity power?
Yes, certainly, Paul. So as what Han has mentioned in Singapore, actually, like for example, renewables, you can already send excess renewables, excess energy to the grid. So I think in terms of research, what we are trying to do at two fronts. One is at the district level. I think there are test bed pilots ongoing at the district level. For example, Jurong Lake District, Jurong Innovation District, where I think at the district level, some of this peak energy, or what you call it, peak shave, it can be done even better. So there has been some pilots as well. In fact, involving Keppel together with JTC. I think they signed an MOU last year on smart microgrids. So I think certainly from the policymaker perspective, in terms of research, we continue to help through the grants, through funding platforms. But I think there is, as what May have also mentioned, there's a lot of benefits in doing so. And then we continue to look out for solutions that has been done as well overseas, including Australia, I think there's a lot to be learned. We are quite nimble. I think the microgrids, smart grids solutions will certainly be the next bound, and how at the national level we can reduce carbon emissions further. But it's not easy. At the building level, from BCA's perspective, from Green Mark, I think we continue to equip the buildings through the Green Mark scheme. That's why we have what we call it intelligence badge, so that the buildings at the building level, minimally, it is future ready to be connected for that eventuality, microgrids, smart grids. So yeah, I think we are fully supportive, and I think it's more or less at the test bidding stage. Hopefully, it is something that we can scale up further. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Edward. And I'll just observe quickly that here in Australia, where we use a system called Neighbours to assess the operational energy of buildings, and Meg's smiling because she has to deal with this stuff all the time. The measured operational energy of buildings, which then is converted on an annual basis, an annual average basis, to building emissions intensity. The scheme as it's currently rated actually works against real-time kind of grid decarbonization, smart grid stuff, because it always uses a little bit more energy to save energy because you lose a bit in storage. So even if you're building through saving energy, substantially reduces its annual emissions profile on an hour-by-hour basis, looked at it on average, use more energy, therefore use more carbon. So the way we measure carbon intensity is in the process of being reviewed and updated to acknowledge the good work that buildings can do to save energy, to store energy, to deploy it right time. So just these systems, especially the complex, robust ones, take time to adjust to emerging practices. We've got some questions coming in, which is terrific. Thanks, Helena, for your questions. Thanks, John, for yours. We'll turn to those in a few minutes. I encourage the rest of you to submit questions as well. One more for our panel before we pick up a couple of questions from the audience. Just thinking about, we've been talking quite specifically about a kind of series of technologies. What other technologies or development practices or building operational practices do you all see as driving really substantial and meaningful decarbonization in our properties and our portfolios? And let's start with you, Edward. You're at the cutting edge of this. What is going to really decarbonize our built environment?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So, based on what we gathered from Green Mark projects, I think we have a lot more super low energy buildings. What we define as super low energy is basically when you achieve 60% energy efficiency improvement over the 2005 levels. So, when we started the SLE program back 5, 6 years ago, it was only a few, and there was only institutional buildings. I think there are more and more technologies on board, and we have close to 200 SLE buildings today. So encompassing commercial, residential, non-residential, industrial buildings. So I think this is really encouraging. So the next bound of technology, if you ask me, is really about alternative cooling technologies. So if you think about it, in at least minimally in our context, we need cooling, and we have a hot and humid climate. And I think the need for energy for cooling is really very high. So what is needed is really how we can get out of ourselves from the dependency on ACMV systems. So I think that's really critical. And if you think about it, in our context, we have very high-rise buildings, both residential and non-residential. So if I ask the likes of Atelier 10, Sabana Jurong, I think it's very challenging to achieve 80% energy efficiency improvement. So knowing that, I think what we can do is really back to basics, and how architects, building designers design the buildings. So I think that's very important. How we can harness more natural ventilation in our buildings, how we can put hybrid cooling seamlessly into buildings. Because if you think about it, as building occupants, there's a lot of transitional spaces in our buildings. and like atrium, lift lobbies, even toilets. People are not working there 24/7. So there's a lot of excess energy that we can cut through our building design. So I think from this perspective, we came out with a GBIG challenge, what we call Green Building Innovation Challenge. And I think last year we called for challenge call. 4 projects came on board, and it basically studied all the various building typologies from hotel, commercial, office typologies, and then residential mixed development as well. So a mix of retail and as well as commercial. So I think the study finding is very interesting. Okay, so the outcome will be released in a couple of months when we have the International Built Environment Week. So stay tuned. One of the findings really suggests that back to basics in terms of building design is very important. How we can harness natural ventilation, I think what you call mixed mode ventilation as well, how we can activate cooling system in a smart way, not just fully on throughout the day, for example. So some of these alternative cooling technologies is quite new. I think we are trying to promote it in both public sector and private sector buildings. We have more and more buildings coming on board. We are collecting data, and I think this could be the next bound. Minimally for temperate countries, minimally for hot and humid countries like us, but perhaps in other temperate countries, there could be other solutions as well. Yeah, maybe I'll stop here. Thanks.
Right, that's exciting, and I'm excited to read all the secrets that are going to be divulged when you release the report in a month. Han at Keppel, where are you investing your time and effort in practices and emerging technologies to decarbonize us, whether it's construction embodied or operational, the full realm of carbon?
Yeah, so across our assets, we do work quite closely with some of the institutional agencies, including BCA and agencies that encourage the proliferation of these startup types of companies in Singapore as well, in sourcing for the appropriate types of technologies for decarbonization as well as for operational efficiency, usually both, right? So when it comes to materials, for instance, we'd like to preserve some embodied carbon further. These are where low embodied carbon types of materials can certainly come in, whether it's concrete, steel, glass, or any mode of interior finishing or interior materials, right? So having what we would define as low embodied carbon types of materials will be the start of that conversation. And that is if we're doing any mode of renovation or rebuild at all. But prior to that conversation, it would be an active decision to retrofit an existing asset as much as possible, simply to strategically enhance its life cycle and therefore preserve to some extent the embodied carbon that's already there, right? So you can't necessarily save every building, but for what you can, you could actually preserve all the years of embodied carbon that came before that and how it was put together in the first place. And making that sort of conscious decision instead of demolishing and rebuilding it does save us a significant amount of embodied carbon. So once we get past that stage, it would be about implementing a well-curated set of solutions that actually work well with one another. So these could be anything from cooling to lighting optimization types of technologies to ventilation technologies to building controls, right? So it's a combination of what's out there in the market, what is already household name in the market, plus any of these new types of technologies that might come up, right? So these would include sensing technologies. These would also include mixed mode ventilation technologies that Edwards touched upon earlier, and ultimately in building management and automation. So it's not just the absolute performance of the building that we need to look at, it's also about how the building is being used. So there's a lot of interplay between the optimization of space, like for instance, in an open office, in an open hot desk office, how would that differ in terms of its consumption profile to a fixed desk office? So we study these types of differences. We study heat maps as to where people tend to congregate in an open office type of environment, for instance, where people tend to congregate in a co-living type of asset, for instance, and then we optimize the technologies behind that accordingly, be it in terms of the purging of stale air or the redistribution of fresher and cooler air. So once all these things are basically responsive based on demand, right? We also see peaks being shaved. We also see, incremental savings to be had, and you shouldn't sort of just ignore some of these savings, even though there's 2-3% or 5%, because once you add it all up together, they could contribute significantly to the overall decarbonization journey, and therefore the savings per year, and therefore the valuation of the building per annum, for instance, right? So it's sort of snowballs to something that's a lot bigger.
Yeah, that's a lot of insights in what you said, Han, not the least of which is we've got to tackle this on many fronts. There's no silver bullet. The other issue that your comment raises for me, it's as an aside, is there's an interesting point where I think an interesting discussion that we need to have about how much the office experience or the residential experience matters versus the energy we save by optimizing performance to bring every last watt out of operations. There are a few buildings in the world that are open plan, but you're only allowed to sit in the open plan areas that have been opened so that they can try and keep as much of the building shut down as possible. Now, that's cool from a standpoint of reducing energy use, but it's a little bit big brother. You get to the office, you want to go to that nice sunny corner, and you're not, there's no lights on, there's no security, there's nothing there because that part of the building is not opened up. That sort of defeats the purpose of going into work and doing your thing. So is that right? Are those watts worth it? Maybe they are. And that's where there's a kind of the possibilities of highly automated controls sort of bump up against the needs of us as people in our workplaces and our homes and our things. May, your thoughts on the kind of a practice or a technology that's going to meaningfully decarbonize your portfolio at Salter Brothers or broader property portfolios?
I'm keeping an eye on three things. The technology, one of them, the first one is a water source heat pump chiller, because ultimately everyone needs cooling, but you also it provides free heating. So in most countries, particularly in a moderate country like Australia, or it doesn't matter, not necessarily Australia, but if you're in a hot country like Singapore, but you've got hotels with a swimming pool, or anything with a heat source, it's actually quite good technology to kind of have free heating as a byproduct of cooling. So that's actually number one. Number two is people counting occupancy sensors. So traditionally, we've always said if you improve outside air and Green Star makes everyone happy, it therefore gives you green points because you're more. What's happened is with the advent of COVID, we're not actually using our office the way we're used to. There's a lot more people working from home. So in itself, we still run the building as we would be in a full tenancy because that's how we've always done it. But now with working from home or in a large office environment with meeting rooms, the people counting occupancy sensor can really significantly reduce the outside air. And in a temperature like 28 degrees in Singapore and humidity, which is the challenge, that creates extra energy to try to reduce that to a comfortable level, because you still not only do you have to deal with the humidity, but also the sensible load. So in a people counting scenario, it's very simple technology. You're not changing too much, but one sensor makes such a huge difference. So that's number two. And then, of course, the AI native language and its ability to capture data across multiple facets. Right now, we run in silos. The electrical system talks to itself. A HVAC system is run by a BMS. The lift system has its own BMS management system. And then the grid doesn't talk to anybody. Now, in an AI world, we would pick that all up together and the AI can decide which is the priority, because we cannot, as a human person, can't understand there's too many inputs all at once. If I want to do demand management, which I try to do manually at ICC, I can only watch two screens at once. So I can know maybe one floor, two floors I can watch in terms of what the energy is going. I can't watch all 20 floors and figure out at which point I need to stop my energy savings measure and then turn it back on. So I can't capture that. And I feel that with the way that AI is scaling so fast, and I'm seeing some really, really amazing AI products out there, I think that's going to be the next crystal ball for us. We're really going to see a huge emerging field coming through that picks up all those vertical layers and bring it all together.
Yeah. And maybe it's not even AI, it could just be thoughtful algorithms. The old-fashioned sense.
Whatever works, we need the data, and we need the
That's
data to
right.
talk to each other. That's it.
That's right. Bringing computational power to bear. I fully agree. Now we've got lots of good questions that come in. Special shout out to Helena Chiu in Singapore, who's been firing off lots of great ones. And Helena asks a question here about how do we basically rigorously and appropriately account for business case for the costs of climate inaction, and how do we build that into our business cases? And I wanted to hear again from each, especially from Han and from May, how are your business cases, or how are your businesses in your work? How are you valuing resilience? How are you valuing adaptation? Are you building in costs of inaction? Are you building in some cost to advocate for more action by everyone else to protect the value of your assets and your businesses? Like as the world changes and gets weirder and hotter and more complicated, how is resilience shaping like hard-nosed business decisions?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. And I think we've gone from running businesses sustainably to running a sustainable business, because ultimately you can't escape from the fact that global warming is really happening. I mean, every summer is a good reminder of that. It just keeps getting hotter and hotter. Either that, our tolerance is getting lower and lower, which is unlikely. So definitely the planet is getting hotter. And I think businesses would be unwise to not factor any of these types of costs in mitigation, or in at least adapting to these changes as part of their modus operandi. And certainly, I think for investments, this takes the form of a couple of things. One is factoring in sufficient expenditure for these measures, and also determining what is the value at risk, right? Should touch wood, any sort of calamity that's climate related happen. And so all this has been talked about in some ways earlier on in the past hour. What I also want to talk about is the allocation of capital. So to Chian's first question as well, I think her question is around how do you justify for the original capex, or what used to be called the green premium, simply because you can sort of counter that argument with some mode of increased building valuation. And the fact is that is a great question, because it is something that we look at both in terms of strategy as well as accounting, right from the very beginning of underwriting in any given asset. Because if you look at factoring in capex, which is part of the building cost, that immediately pumps up the cost of the building, whether or not it's for material, for amenities, or in this case for sustainability. And the moment that's sort of bumped up, it makes your investment returns, or your return on equity, or return of investment, or even your IRR, that impacts that figure, right? And it's a shift in the spreadsheet, because if that figure goes up, inversely, the returns figure comes down, and then it just doesn't pass that gateway that needs to be passed in order for investment to go ahead, right? So what then needs to be done is to look at how we can break down the costs of such capex. Of course, I talked earlier about the cost curves coming down, right, for building technologies and for decarbonisation technologies. But as much as that is true, it still comes at a cost. So how then do you sort of place that into a more gradual, consistent, and more sustainable, in that sense of the word, sort of expenditure that is then distributed over its life cycle, or at least the asset or the fund life cycle, across its operational expenditure, right? So factoring in these types of things, and also employing sustainability as a service type of products and types of services, will actually distribute the cost over time. And if the cost is distributed over time, all the more the pressure to gain these savings to supersede or to far offset these costs will then come in, right? So it's in some ways positive pressure that will lead you to be even more clever and be even more strategic about putting in the right sorts of solutions, plus the right types of accounting models for the asset.
Right.
Right. I don't know if that's left enough time for anyone else, but that's really how we're looking at it. It's different on a case-by-case basis. It's different depending on the cost of technology, and it's certainly different for different geographies that we operate in.
Yeah, and I think fundamentally it shares the responsibility of responding. So
Yeah.
it's not just one thing; it's many things over many realms over time. And May, quick one: how are you factoring
Yeah,
in
okay,
resilience
so
and future risks?
just something like, I mean, Hans talked quite a lot about understanding that pathway. I think the challenge, a lot of this is actually a lot of the value at risk component is really done through insurance, and insurance are not necessarily want to share the data with you because they hold all the cards. But what we're seeing at least is that you have to have one foot in each camp, because you have to focus what can you do operationally that reduces your risk in the climate context, and then also you have to then accept that there will be, is it better to look at avoidance and actually just create systems like ground tanks for stormwater drainage to make sure you never flood, or is it best to kind of look at your increase in insurance premium? But it's not an isolation. I think the major component is that you have to bear some responsibility into the loss of your day-to-day business, and then from there you have to actually look at what level of capex you need to introduce, because obviously this is new science for everybody. No one's got the spare money for resilience. People just need to kind of have to weigh the cost of, okay, if I'm going to be in operational out for a day, that's $1 million. Okay, fine, $1 million, because insurance only start on day 2. You're absorbing $1 million. Then okay, then if I hit that once or once every 5 years, then maybe I'm going to have to divert 200 every year to avoid that, or I can actually put in a 500 half a mil system. So those are the kind of characteristics that we're working towards. But like I said, the data is sporadic. You're just going to have to do it, and then as more data comes around, you just have to complete and reevaluate your position on this.
Right. Edward, quick comment on where BCA is going with resilience. How are you encouraging property owners to operationalize resilience and adaptation?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So, fully agree with what Han and May have said. In fact, we took resilience quite seriously early on when we developed the Green Mark back in 2020, 2021, hence the last version on Green Mark 2021. We already have a resilience badge section in Green Mark alongside other badges like whole life carbon, intelligence, maintainability, health and well-being. So resilience, I think, is very important, especially for Singapore. Low-lying lands more, and we are prone to higher rainfall intensity, higher temperatures. I think eventually it will affect buildings and building occupants. So we need to adjust on how the building operates. I think back during COVID, together with the Ministry of Health, we even issue guidance how the building need to operate. As what also may have said, there has to be a balance between the energy and the indoor air quality. So yeah, in terms of resilience section in Green Mark, we are doing a refresh. Ultimately, is basically to keep pace with what the financial institutions, bank, corporates, businesses like Keppel will need to incorporate eventually in their disclosures and as part of the green financing. We even heard from the banks that they started to take in climate risks and resilience as very important in the checklist for the investors. So I think it's going to be quite mainstream, perhaps in the near future. And I think from the green building rating system perspective, at least for Green Mark, we need to be quite future ready. We need to cater for that. Hence, we are doing a refresh to update some of these requirements as well. Yeah.
Terrific. Well, we've reached the end of our hour. Thanks so much, Edward, Han, and May, for all of your insights about the challenges of sustainability ahead of us in 2026 and beyond. And back to you, Jenny, to wrap us up.
Yes, big round of sincere thank you to all the speakers and also for those online for joining us today and asking you questions. And we look forward to continuing these conversations to continue to highlight the business case for sustainability. And we've put the resources that are mentioned today into the chat. So that includes the article for this year on the trends that we've been discussing, as well as you can see how these trends have changed over the last 5 years as the world has changed. And also the technology decarb map that Edward has mentioned that was just put out last month. So with that, everyone, hopefully have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.